Okay, you know what? I am going to kill many small animals. Many small animals. Is this thing still running? Yeah, of course. That would also make too much sense. I'm gonna raise my recording volume. Hopefully that'll do something. Okay. All right. That should do it. That should do it. And no, don't anybody tell me that it won't do it. Hi. Hi. Okay. Hello, my name is Spencer. I am a high school student from Freestyle Academy in Mountain View, California, the greatest state in the Union, which is absolutely not debatable. So if anybody has any problems with me saying that, let's take it outside, bub, because let me tell you, we're gonna throw down. And I'm here to talk about world building. This is the final of the 3 presentations that I made for my class, in which I made a project that was about pirates sailing around and having a nice time. It was a 24 episode long story. It had a lot of intrigue, a lot of characters, and I spent a lot of time working on it before it was abruptly canceled by a trip that went south when my notepad was stolen, and I had to spend 4 extra days in the United Kingdom, which killed all my momentum. It was totally that fault. I'm not like a lazy person by nature. Wow, I'm horrible at introductions. All right, let's get cooking. This is the world building presentation. All right. This is the world building presentation, a presentation on world building. So, world building. World building. World building is fun. Fun, really important. World building is very important if you want to make a believable world for your characters to live in. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're writing a story about horses and they say everybody, then people are going to start asking questions. Why do they say everybody? Why don't they say every horsey? You know, some person, some horse. Wrong again. You know, maybe they'll have a tendency to say nay or yay more often. I wouldn't really know. I've never written a story about horses. World building is important because if you don't do it, then you're not going to have an interesting setting. Even really lame things that are like not at all different from a regular world have a little bit of world building. Like the TV show Chuck, which is amazing, exists in a world where it would be plausible for somebody to have the entire database of the FBI installed onto their brains just by looking at a screen. What world building went into that? Well, you'll see if you decide to watch the TV show Chuck. The movie Back to the Future exists in a world where Doc Brown, you know, it makes enough scientific innovations that some ridiculous stuff is possible in the year 2015. You know, there's a lot of really basic stuff that goes into world building that you might not be able to see otherwise. Back to the Future actually does a really good job of it, come to think of it, which I hadn't before. Transformers exists in a world where, you know, a bunch of robots live on a cube and they have an eternal conflict or whatever. I never watched Transformers. I want to make that clear. As anybody who has watched Transformers probably could after that statement about them living on a cube. Pretty sure they don't live on a cube, but I also could be wrong about that again. World building is fun, really important. I put in another thing just for safety's sake. World building is writing and designing fictional worlds, languages, cultures, and other things for the sake of telling stories in said world and universe, often for televisions and movies and books, but most frequently done in Dungeons and Dragons, which is, as everybody knows, the most common form of nerds sitting down and imagining different worlds. You know, they gotta imagine a world where they could be king. In order to do this, you need a lot of insight into a lot of different cultures, histories, and science in the real world in order to make things believable. For example, in my story, you know, I had to research boats and like flags and stuff so that I wouldn't like accidentally design a boat that was like totally unbelievable. Like, oh, excuse me, why would the Omoan people have this kind of boat? You know, I had to do a lot of research into that kind of stuff. In order to plan out your world, this requires a lot of hard work and thinking and planning and, you know, writing experience so you can remember everything and how things work. A lot of things that people do, you know, they'll write it down in notebooks, they'll look back at the notebooks earlier, and a lot of it is just like thinking and thinking and thinking. Basically, It's important, and it's really cool. Why is world building important? It deepens your own understanding of the world. For me, I learned a lot about some really obscure stuff that I wouldn't know otherwise, like how languages develop, Amazonian domestication, and the splitting of rivers. Pro tip, rivers do not split. It also makes your story's world feel a lot more real. There might be some things that you just never thought of that you are suddenly commonplace in your world, and you've just gotta do that. Gotta go through, and make sure that you understand these things so that your characters don't just stoop and like drink from a water fountain. Because why would your society have a water fountain if they're like from medieval times or whatever? Some people who are really famous about this, J.R.R. Tolkien has his freaking like constructed languages. He's got his whole like world all planned out and stuff. George R.R. Martin, he's got all these like really immersive characters and a ridiculous history. Gene R.R. Roddenberry. Basically, these people have become staples because of how real their worlds feel. Like, if we think fantasy world, we think of J.R.R. Tolkien. If we think like elves and stuff, they're always beautiful, blonde-haired, indistinguishable from women, and ridiculous like that. And if we think of dwarves, we're always like drunk Scottish bastards who are running around shoving hammers and pickaxes into the rocks. And if we think of like the future, we're probably thinking of Star Trek. I'll be honest. Star Wars comes pretty close, but also something that I feel like Star Wars people should realize: Star Wars actually happened a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, so it's actually not the future, it's the past. Gotcha. And so on and so forth. World building can give you ideas for other happenings in the story. An example from my story, by the way, some background: a MacGuffin is basically something that your heroes have. For example, in Lord of the Rings, the MacGuffin was the ring. It was important to destroy the ring. In like Star Trek, let's see, what's another thing with a MacGuffin in it? Looking around my room, searching for examples of MacGuffins that I cannot think of. Okay, for example, my story's MacGuffin, which is basically just a singular item that was it's like very important for the heroes to understand, like the stick of truth or the ring of the one ring. My story's MacGuffin was called the Florendo device, and I only decided what it would be after I did the world building, and I was like, oh my god, it would make so much sense if my story's MacGuffin was this. And I'll explain more what the Florendo device does later when I get to the section where I talk about how I applied world building in my story. So, world building can deepen your own understanding of the world. What you see on the screen in front of you is a place in the world called Amazonia, which is like awesome. It is a huge rainforest sort of area, and basically what happens in Amazonia was in ancient times, when there were the people going around living in the rainforest, they would domesticate plants, which is something that you don't think of Native Americans doing. Usually, personally, I think of them wearing I personally, whenever I think of South American civilizations, I think of, the kind of stuff that they would do with their huge ornate monuments and building stone pyramids and stuff. You don't really think about domestication of plants so much, but it is something that they did and something that was very important to them as people. And this shows because in the Amazon, you can see, based on trees and such, where ancient cultures used to live based on what kind of trees grew nearby, because they actually did domesticate trees before the Europeans came in and ruined everything. They had trees and such that they would basically use for whatever purpose they would use trees for, which is amazing. Basically, just old now people can tell, oh, an ancient civilization used to live here. I can tell because the trees nearby would be really well suited for ancient civilizations. So that's basically Amazonian domestication. I might be screwing up the something there, and I probably am, but I doubt that anybody who knows any better will be watching this, so suck it. Another thing, rivers splitting. Rivers do not split. On the world building subreddit, which is something that some of you might like to look at, I've posted a few links of that onto this slideshow. On the world building subreddit, it has actually become a meme that people post splitting rivers. Rivers do not split. Two rivers might flow into one big river. In fact, that happens quite often, but rivers will never split around and turn into two different rivers because that's just not how they work. I'm sorry to break that to you. This is a really nice guide that I found on the world building subreddit about how big a world would be. You know, how long would it take for your main character to travel the world by foot? 8 hours of walking a day. You know, if you want your world to be like the size of Ireland, it would take 14 days, New Zealand 47, and Africa would take 10 months. And so that would be sort of, you know, it would take one man 11 years to walk around the earth, apparently. And so that'll give you like sort of an idea of scale and such when you're writing down and you're making your maps and such. There's also something that I used that gave me a whole bunch of help while I was deciding what kind of regions would be in my world, which is this little pyramid over here that shows, you know, the Arctic regions and so on and so forth in terms of increasing temperature and dryness. So like a tundra could be really hot, but it's still probably going to be a tundra because it's, you know, it's just too high. And you know, a tropical region, that's when things start to matter a little bit. You know, it can only be so hot before and so wet and so on. And yeah, it's really useful when you're deciding like, oh, okay, so the stuff up north, that would probably be more like tundra or boreal forests. This thing over here, we'll see, considering that that's at this latitude, it's probably one of these things, and, you know, the sun will, or whatever. It's super important. It's very good to know. I'd highly recommend the usage of this because it helped me a lot while I was building my maps. World building makes a story feel more real. When it comes to shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, there are so many things, like, one thing that comes to mind would be, like, the animals in that show. There are just some really interesting animals that are like crosses between animals that we have and some kind of fantasy thing left in there. Like Momo, which is a flying monkey. There's like large koi fish and such. There are like lizard rabbits or something. Like there's just something about it that, you know, it's so exotic and unique, and it really makes you think like, wow, I mean, this is just amazing. They also do this with their clothing, which I think, actually the clothing in Avatar: The Last Airbender takes me out of it a little bit, I'll be honest, but they really do put a lot of thought, care, and consideration into everything that they did in that show, and it really does show. And this is something that I took from the world building subreddit, which is a very badly constructed land, the one of cliche. Over here we can see like, oh, here's Elven home, here's the dwarves, this is where people are too cold, this is like the exotic place, oh, the dragon lives here, the protagonist is from here, this is where the unlikely heroes are from, and you know, there's a river that splits and so on and so forth. But it's an example of a world that just does not feel real because it's so cliched. This is another one. This is honestly one of the worst maps that I've ever seen. Like pictures aside, like, oh, okay, there are obviously going to be elves here. You know, there's an inland sea. Oh, I bet this is a naval power. And oh, this is probably where all the exotic cultures come from. I mean, this place just looks like a friggin' boot. Oh, yeah, these mountain ranges, oh, so conveniently placed. Oh, yeah, okay, this is just a ridiculous map. I hate this map. But when it comes down to sort of the things that actually look real, this is a great example from the world building subreddit, where they like took a bunch of things that you wouldn't think of. Like when you're like, oh, I'm gonna create a nation, the first thing you'd think of is probably not like, oh, how do rich brides and grooms dress? But that's something that this culture would individually decide on, you know, and that's just something that happens over time. And this individual from the world building subreddit, if this gets posted to YouTube, I'll put a link up. This individual went and took a lot of care into sort of deciding what kind of dyes, what kind of cloths would be available to these people, and what would be an appropriate expenditure for each of these individual classes to spend on their uniforms. World building is important because it can give you other ideas for happenings in the story. In my story in particular, skip straight ahead to how I used world building in my project. My story takes place in sort of a pirate setting. there are like lots of people, pirates and such. They're roaming around. There are a bunch of privateers, and so the big MacGuffin, which is what I called the Florendo device, is a steam engine. Because the fact of the matter is, when steam power was first introduced, it changed a whole bunch of things. You know, suddenly you could make big boats out of iron that wouldn't sink when a few cannonballs got tossed their way and all that stuff. And I was like, oh my god, this makes so much sense. This explains why, you know, these people would want it so much. This explains why these people would want it so much. This explains why this character would want to keep it away. And it just fit into the world so perfectly that I wanted to keep it there. The only problem was, tone-wise, people will think that I'm a Luddite now for the story, because at the end, they destroy the engine and they're like, we're not ready for this. I guarantee you, my story is not about that. It's not like, oh, technology is bad, because technology isn't bad. It's just sort of a commentary about how, you know, sometimes people aren't ready for some things. Which makes more sense in context that you will never get, because my story will never be released. So it goes. So my device, so basically the Florendo device was a steam engine, which made perfect sense in so many ways for my story, and it managed to work around something that I personally hate, which is magic systems. I did not want to have to explain a magic system in my world, and thanks to this, I didn't have to. So in my world, there is absolutely no magic, and that's all thanks to this MacGuffin that I thought of at the last moment.
Because your friends suck.
Thanks, Cole. I was in the middle of making a video, but do you want to tell me anything else? You piece of crap?
You know, I would like a Viking hat.
Okay. So, anyways, sorry, my little brother just walked in. So, world building, basically, I didn't want to have to introduce a magic system into my world, and thanks to the Florendo device, my MacGuffin, I didn't have to. I came up with a totally original reason why this thing would exist and why so many people would be after it, and now I don't have to explain a whole bunch of magic-y things and make a bunch of episodes about, oh, you must learn this discipline of the magic, and so on and so forth. So, this is a map that I made. It is completely based off of the San Juan Islands, which is an archipelago in North Washington. I took one look at it and I was like, oh my god, this is perfect for a fantasy RPG thing. And it was, and it is. So this map is totally based off of that. If you go and look at a picture on Google Maps, you will find it is practically identical, except for all the changes that I made to it. I added a few islands here and there, and I, of course, expanded it tenfold so that it would have enough space for my story to take place in. So the first thing I did when I made my story was I wrote a bunch of history for it, which is a terribly daunting task, and I somehow managed to pull it off in like a week. And just because I did does not mean that you can. I'm not saying that I'm special, but I am saying that I have a potentially damaging work ethic that will slow me down in the future, and it will probably only be fueled by caffeine and cocaine. So this is my world. This is something that I managed to make, and I took a lot of time working on it, and eventually I came up with a whole bunch of different maps to explain every little facet, or at least most of the major facets that are explored during my story. These are all the cities in it. They're all named after real cities because I didn't want to have to bother coming up with a bunch of new cities. You could probably tell based off of city names what these kinds of things are made out of. I named some of the islands after my friends because I love them and I never want to forget them. And, you know, like over here we have Florendo, which is where the Florendo device was invented. A little bit of trivia for you. And, you know, over here we have Viana, which is the name of my favorite Disney movie. And here we have Iraq Island, which is me struggling to think of a name but not wanting to name it after anybody important. And here's Kazakhstan, which is a lot smaller in this world than it is in the real world. I can give you so much friggin' trivia about any place in this world. I went really in depth. You don't have to go that in depth. You don't have to know that Schleswig was founded by the Drenthe Empire back before they were all united, and remained a very small city for a good long while before Randers was founded next to it and brought a lot of trade and commerce over. You don't have to know that New Pago Pago was named after a city that was wiped out in the island of Taylor by the very first plague. You don't have to know that. You just have to know a little bit of history for whatever might be pertinent in your world. And if you know any more, good for you. Make another story out of it once your first story is done. This is a map of political situation. These is the borders of my world. A lot of things might look out of place. New Pago Pago, for some reason, belongs to the Drenth, which are sort of the Northern European type culture. For some reason, Reykjavik belongs to the Omoans, which are sort of a Polynesian culture. And for some reason, Kyoto also belongs to the Omoans when it should belong to the Cuellar Union, which is based on East Asian culture. And we have a city called Mecca, which is honestly playing with fire at this point. But Liverpool is a city owned by a Middle Eastern culture, which also does not make sense. It kind of shows the history a little bit here and there, that, you know, some of these situations are very confusing. For some reason, on the Kuwait continent, Rabat is there, and it's owned, and you know, Nanjing is owned by the Europeans, and you know, there's just a lot of weird border stuff that also exists in real life. I mean, that was a little bit of decisions that I came up with while I was working through. This is a more of a culture map, so this would explore the culture a little bit. So maybe the darker regions would be more of a Viking type world, as might be shown by, you know, their names, like Kolting and Copenhagen. You know, those are Danish cities, so you know, they would be a little more Danish. This would be sort of like owned by the more British kind of Europeans. Maybe these would be owned by the more like Tongan Polynesians, whereas this would be like I don't know, maybe these and you know, this would be more Vietnamese, whereas this would be more Chinese, and the city-state of Shimonoseki would be like kind of Japanese. This would be I went into a lot of time into thinking how the stuff might be. This is obviously not 100% the way that culture would work in real life. It would probably be a lot more multifaceted. There would be like a mixture of Drenthe and Kuemar culture in Nanjing, and in the city of Liverpool there might be still some remaining Drenthe culture because of its conquering or whatever, but you know, it was conquered so long ago and so on. A lot of creative decisions, basically. This is a religious map. Religion is something I didn't really want to go into that far because I have a lot of very offensive opinions about it. But this is how this world would like see religion. The dominant religion in the north is Boat Mormonism, essentially the same as regular Mormonism, except for that they follow Boat Jesus. Down then there's Boat Catholicism over in sort of the started in I believe, what's this island called again? Parkinson Island, and spread to lands like Vailele and Tafuna. Boat East Orthodox, which is mostly in sort of the Constantinople or Istanbul, my bad, which is mostly in sort of the Byzantine area. And then in these areas, in the sort of this half of the world, there's Fuck Dave and Fuck John, which are two religions started by people who felt very strongly towards each other in a very negative way. Down here in the Sinop region, which is based off of Mediterranean culture, is Leg Day. They appreciate sort of self-improvement above everything else, and that shows a lot in their culture. Essentially what happened behind the scenes was me realizing that Mediterranean culture is super interesting, and I could not contain it all without accidentally missing something that was really amazing, so I decided to just throw it all out the window and turn the Mediterraneans into bro dudes. Or into dude bros. Which is something that I was very fond of. And at this point, you might be able to see a little bit of the tone of my story. I wasn't exactly taking myself super seriously. So, this is the iceberg concept of culture, jumping straight from the maps into something that you probably won't see on maps. There's some stuff that might be primarily in awareness. When we think of the British, we probably think of like, oh, their tea, you know, the way that they cook, you know, the way, oh, like they dress better, you know, James Joyce, overrated, but, you know, very famous, and all that kind of stuff. But then you, like, you know, primarily out of awareness, you wouldn't know how the British would define, like, sin. You wouldn't know what they think about sort of like, you know, how I don't know, roles, you don't understand the way that their eyes will look at things, you don't understand their conception of self, the way that they arrange their physical space, all that stuff. That's like stuff that most people wouldn't really think about when they're thinking about another culture. But if you're doing world building, you will have to think about that kind of stuff, which is a right shame. It's actually kind of interesting, I'll be honest. I really enjoyed doing this. Like going through and finding all the different icebergs and being all like, how would the Drenth view their, the patterns of visual perception? And if you want to make an evil empire like super evil, be all like, oh yes, they only see things in ways of winning and losing, and they never want to lose. And if you want to make, like some people like super like nice, be like, oh, their life is always at a very leisurely way. They don't really believe in leadership. Everybody's friends. They become friends very quickly or whatever. That's just a really great way of sort of understanding how culture works and getting a little more in depth with it than you might have to otherwise. So these are some maps that I decided to work on following my discovery of the iceberg concept. How would these people view themselves? How would they arrange their maps? Up here would be the Drenth map, which is basically the Northern European types. You can see they've sort of distorted the map to make themselves bigger. The colors are very bold because that's the way that they see themselves. They're like a very like strong nation. They want to think that they're on top of the world. Down here, the Cuellar Union, since I didn't put a scale on the map, they decided that, west is up. So west is upwards. That's just the way things are going to be from now on because we're amazing. They've also distorted the maps that they're bigger, but their colors are a lot more faded, which sort of represents how their values may be changed, may be very different from the bold-faced colors of these. Over here are sort of the pastel colors belonging to the Amoans, sort of the Polynesians. They have less of a concept of like space or borders. They just believe that everybody should just be friends. And oh, it's so beautiful. I love the world and everything, which gets them into trouble. And they are sort of the protagonists of the story, which makes it very interesting. So their colors are all pastel because that's just kind of the way they see things. And then over here are the colors of the Sinope, which are, again, the Middle Eastern kind of culture. They want to see themselves as big, so they've decided that their nation is a bicep, and everybody else is very small, except for the Amoans, who they feel very kind towards. And their colors are very dark and very accented. So these are some flags I did, some heraldry. This would be the flag of the Drenth. This up here would be their national flag. It's got the cross of boat Mormonism on it. This would be their naval jack, which is what they would hang on boats for ceremonies. This would be a citizenship flag, so if they were at war with somebody, it would be considered like a war crime in this world to shoot down a ship that was bearing that flag unless that ship was actually lying about being a citizen. So this would be a way to distinguish like fishing boats from regular old boats. And then this would be their war flag, which is, what they would fly to let their troops know, hey, we're the good guys, and so that they would, during war, nobody would get confused. These are the flags of the Cuellar Union. This is the national flag, naval jack, war flag, and citizenship flag. Again, they all have their various different meanings. The Cuellar Union is mostly based off of Chinese and Vietnamese culture, predominantly Vietnamese, because in the history of my world, the Vietnamese were really the ones that went out and sought the creation of the Union, as opposed to the Chinese sort of civilization, which sort of fell by the wayside and eventually got strong-armed into it. Which is why there's a lot less of their imagery here than there would be otherwise. Over here is a black screen. I'm not entirely sure why, I'll be honest. Is everything okay, Firefox? Are you doing alright? I'm closing that window. Firefox has decided that it doesn't want to expend data on this anymore, which is really good. I love this browser so much. It's way better than Chrome. I'm glad that I decided to use it. Great, we're doing this again. Yuck it up, sleazeball. Okay, guess we're closing Firefox right now. I hope you're happy with yourself. Let's go into Task Manager. Everybody look at my desktop. More details, please. Firefox. Firefox. F. Okay, it's crashed. Great. Alright. Glad we're doing this. Glad we had to show the entire world our dirty laundry. Let's go into Drive. Here we go. Whew. So, anybody seen any good movies? I have. I saw Arrival on the plane ride back home. It was pretty good, despite the fact that I was like on a plane. I still managed to see it. Honestly, I felt like it was a bit of a little bit redundant, but I do appreciate the message and the cinematography, and it was just very pretty. I agree. Wait, wrong folder. Definitely appreciate Arrival. If you've ever read the book, what was it? If you've ever read the book Slaughterhouse-Five, it kind of reminded me of that for reasons that I'm not going to say, because that would be a spoiler. Arrival, also a very good example of world building, by the way, in that they showed us a bunch of different, how the aliens speak and the way that they think, and oh, look at this, the Mahjong. They're teaching them Mahjong, which is a game which is based off of winning and losing. It was great. So anyway, these are the flags of the Omoan types, which are again the protagonists. You can see their colors are very pastel. They don't actually have flags, they have flowers that they will paint on the sides of their ships. So this would be sort of their nation symbol. This would be their naval jack. They'd put this on for ceremonies. This would be a citizenship flag. And then the Chinese hibiscus would be for war, because I always saw it as a huge laser beam that was gathering up energy and it was about to fire out, personally. And then this is the emblem. This is the crest of the Sinnoh people. It's got a tank top over here with the crow, muscle milk, some barbells, protein powder, and of course some huge biceps on the side. There are more flags for them, but unfortunately they didn't export properly, so I couldn't put them in this slideshow. So it goes. But I guarantee you that none of them were as magnificent as this one, so you're not missing out on much. But yeah, that was the world building that I did for my project. That is some guidelines on how you can do world building in the future. I'm very appreciative that you took the time to watch this 31-minute video. Absolutely insane. I can't believe I managed to talk for this long without losing my voice and also being interrupted by my little brother, who came in to tell me that my friends were the worst. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for bearing with me. And thank you for taking the time, and I do hope that you all use this in whatever projects you plan on using in the future. I've been Spencer, you have been magnificent, and ciao.